My name is Nora Ellery, and for 22 years, Helix Dynamics had been the only place I belonged. At 44, I'd stopped counting the number of nights I slept in that glass tower instead of at home. Precision and restraint, that was how I survived corporate storms. Until today. 2 security guards gripped my elbows, their hands firm but uneasy. The conference room lights burned white across 500 faces, all frozen in that half-second between disbelief and obedience. Damon Wexler stood on stage, tailored suit flawless, microphone clutched like a gavel. "Escort her out," he said, his voice steady enough to echo through the speakers. No one moved at first. I could see the HR director blinking too fast, the interns pretending to type. Someone coughed. Then the guards guided me forward, and the silence broke into a low, collective exhale. My badge had already been deactivated. The red light blinked against my chest like a verdict. I kept my head high as I walked. My reflection followed me along the glass wall, tired eyes, gray hair tied back, spine straight. I had promised myself I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But before I reached the door, the lights flickered. A technician gasped. The massive screens behind Damon blinked from blue to black. Then, in bold red letters, across every display, primary key missing. For 1 suspended heartbeat. No one breathed. The hum of the air conditioning vanished. Damon turned toward the screens, confused, then angry. "Restart it," he snapped. The lead engineer stammered. "Sir, that's impossible." The speakers erupted with the sharp wail of alarms. Error messages cascaded down the walls like digital fire. Phones buzzed, people shouted, red light flooded the room. Damon shouted orders I could barely hear over the noise. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The system I had built, the one I'd poured decades into perfecting, wasn't malfunctioning. It was responding. When the guards hesitated, I stepped past them. The glass doors slid open on their own, sensors still recognizing me when everything else refused to. Behind me, the Empire trembled. I walked out into the corridor, calm and certain, as the world I had built began to unravel. The morning light seeped through the blinds of my small apartment on Capitol Hill, slicing the room into narrow bars of gold and gray. My father stirred in the recliner beside the window, the oxygen machine breathing with him in quiet rhythm. He had been a machinist before the stroke's steady hands, patient eyes, and though his voice was softer now, his stubbornness had survived intact. "You're working already," he murmured, his words slurred but warm. "Just a maintenance patch," I said, turning my laptop toward the faint light. Lines of code scrolled past like pulse readings. Minor stability update for the Helix core. He smiled faintly, still keeping the world running. I didn't answer. On the table beside me lay a stack of unopened envelopes, medical invoices, insurance denials, payment plans printed in red. I slid them under my notebook before he could notice. The last thing he needed was more worry. A kettle hissed in the kitchenette. I poured him tea, steadying his hand around the mug before sitting back at my desk. Outside, rain blurred the skyline, washing the mirrored towers of downtown Seattle into one dull silhouette. The Helix VPN flickered green in the corner of my screen. I logged in, fingers moving automatically through the update sequence I'd written years ago. Stability protocols, transaction integrity, recovery thresholds, everything routine. Except the system felt slower that morning, like it was hesitating. I ran a diagnostic. All green. Still. The unease sat behind my ribs like a splinter. My phone buzzed corporate town hall mandatory attendance. 9 a.m. Unusual. We rarely held full assemblies on a Tuesday. I made a note to finalize the patch before leaving. "Dad," I said, closing the laptop. "I'll be home early today. They just want another briefing." He reached for my hand, his skin cool against mine. "Don't let them take too much of you." "Nora." I smiled, the kind of smile you give when the truth would sound too heavy. 12 hours later, Every word he'd said would echo through the alarms. By the time I reached Helix Tower, the rain had turned to mist, coating the glass facade in a pale shimmer. The lobby smelled of polished marble and new money, two things the company had in abundance now that Damon Wexler sat in his father's chair. He called me up before I could even pour my first coffee. His assistant's voice, smooth but urgent, said, "Mr. Wexler would like a word." That was never an invitation, it was a summons. The top floor looked different since he'd taken over. The old photos of the founding team were gone, replaced by abstract art and a wall-sized screen looping Helix's new slogan, "Innovate, accelerate, dominate." The word dominate always left a taste of metal in my mouth. Damon stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his reflection merging with the skyline. He was barely 30, clean-shaven, expensive, the kind of man who smiled for cameras and frowned only when no one was watching. "Nora," he said, turning with a practiced grin. "I want to understand our systems better, especially the administrative core, the primary keychain." I stopped just inside the doorway. "You already have top-level access." "Yes, but I need full visibility. I'm running the company now. I should know how every circuit breathes." I kept my tone neutral. That's not how Helix was built. The root key was never designed for multiple holders. It's a safeguard. His smile tightened. "You think I'm asking for permission?" I met his gaze evenly. "Some doors stay locked for a reason. Damon. Even for you. For a moment." Something flickered behind his eyes, a crack in the charm. A flash of anger quickly sealed over. He turned away, pretending to study the city. "I'll have legal review it," he said at last. Voice cool again. "You'll hear from them soon." I nodded, left his office, and caught my reflection in the mirrored hallway. My pulse was steady, but a quiet dread moved through me like static. Something had changed in that room. He wanted power he didn't understand, and that was always how systems broke. The town hall meeting was set in the main auditorium, a theater of glass and steel that could hold nearly 500 people. Rows of screens shimmered along the walls, displaying Helix's logo in sterile white. I sat near the aisle with my tablet balanced on my knees, trying not to think about the strange tension humming through the room. Damon entered last, flanked by the heads of finance and HR. His posture radiated control. He moved as though the entire building bent slightly to accommodate him. Behind him, a new slide appeared on the main screen. "Restructuring for a stronger future." I felt a chill trace the back of my neck. He started with rehearsed optimism, speaking of efficiency, innovation, the company's next phase. But halfway through, his tone shifted. "For Helix to remain agile," he said, "we have to make difficult decisions. Effective immediately. We'll be parting ways with certain legacy positions that no longer align with our growth strategy." He paused, looking straight at me. "Chief Systems Architect Nora Ellery." A soft murmur rippled across the seats. The HR director beside him avoided my eyes. Damon smiled. "Not the polite kind, but the kind people wear when they know they've won." "Your contributions have been invaluable," he continued. "But the board has decided to pursue a more modern direction. Security will assist you with your transition." The microphone picked up the faint tremor of my breath. I stood, careful to keep my hands steady. My badge blinked red against my blouse already deactivated. The gesture was small, almost theatrical. But it worked. A single light on the control panel had reduced me to a bystander in my own company. No one spoke as I walked past them. My heels echoed against the marble floor, a rhythm of restraint and humiliation. When the doors closed behind me, I exhaled for the first time. The building's hum seemed different, lower, aware. Somewhere deep in the code, the system I'd built was already listening. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside, the polished steel reflecting the stiffness in my shoulders. My badge hung useless at my side, its red light still blinking, faint but steady like a heartbeat I no longer owned. As the elevator descended, a muffled sound echoed from above. It wasn't shouting at first, just a ripple of uneasy movement through the floors. I glanced up toward the ceiling vent. Somewhere, the hum of the building had changed pitch. When the doors opened at the lobby, 2 interns rushed past me toward the stairwell, whispering, "Did you see it? It's spreading behind them." The lobby monitors flickered. The Helix logo glitched for a fraction of a second, the colors bleeding into static before stabilizing. A receptionist frowned and tapped her keyboard, but nothing happened. Upstairs, in the control wing, a junior engineer named Malik was the first to notice the anomaly. I'd worked with him once during an overnight deployment, bright, meticulous, still believed that logic could fix anything. Transaction loop failure, he muttered, scanning the console. Authentication chain broken. Rerouting protocols stalled. He flagged it to the internal channel. The warning ping reached Damon's phone mid-conversation on stage. "Minor system hiccup," he told the audience, waving a careless hand. "It has it handled," but Malik's screen was already bleeding red. "Sir, it's escalating," he said over the comms. "These errors aren't random, they're sequential." On the auditorium walls, the Helix logo froze mid-spin. Then, one by one, every screen in the building turned black. A heartbeat later, lines of red text rippled across them. "Primary key missing." Gasps filled the room. Phones buzzed in pockets. The hum of hundreds of devices disconnected at once. From where I stood near the glass doors, I saw the first wave of panic, a technician dropping his headset, an executive clutching her phone, Damon spinning toward the stage monitors, disbelief twisting into fear. The alarms began to sound, and as the building drowned in red light, I realized my system wasn't collapsing. It was waking up. The alarms didn't stop. They multiplied. Their pulse echoed through every floor. A synthetic heartbeat too fast to breathe with. The corridor outside the auditorium filled with the sound of running shoes and open comm lines. Through the glass wall, I could see the control room lighting up like a war zone. Inside, technicians crowded around their terminals, faces pale in the glow of red monitors. Malik's voice cracked through the intercom, strained but steady. "Reboot sequence initiated. Still failing. System authentication loop rejecting all credentials. Try the recovery cluster." Someone shouted. "I did," Malik replied. "The backup is requesting the original key, then denying its own request." Damon appeared in the control room doorway, flanked by 2 executives. He looked smaller now, stripped of the polish that came with certainty. "Get it back online," he barked, "whatever it takes." The lead technician, a woman named Sophia Hahn, didn't look up. "Sir, it's not just the servers. The entire infrastructure has locked us out. Even the fallback node won't authorize." Phones buzzed endlessly. Executives answered only to turn pale as the news spread: transactions frozen, client accounts inaccessible, automated trading halted mid-cycle. Someone whispered the number, and it hit the room like gunfire. $500,000 a minute. The color drained from Damon's face. "That's impossible. Override it manually." Sophia finally turned toward him. "Override what the system doesn't recognize you as an administrator, or anyone else." A silence fell, thick and dangerous. The sound of alarms pressed against the windows. Malik stood, trembling, reading from his terminal. "It's rejecting all input. It keeps repeating the same phrase." He swallowed, then read aloud the words glowing across every screen. "Primary key missing." Damon slammed his palm against the nearest desk. Then, "Find it." But the system's logic was absolute. There was no key to find because the only person it trusted had already been escorted out. From the hallway, I watched the empire I had built close its own gates, one lock after another, sealing itself from the hands that never deserved to hold it. The glass doors to the control room burst open with a force that silenced the chaos. For a moment, the alarms seemed quieter, almost respectful. Richard Wexler stood in the doorway, the man whose name still hung on the building's front wall in silver steel letters. Age had carved his face, but authority hadn't left it. He carried the kind of gravity that made people step aside without being asked, "What happened here?" His voice cut through the panic. The room stilled. Malik looked up from his station, eyes wide behind his glasses. "System-wide failure. Sir, no admin access. Every terminal's locked under primary key missing." "We've tried every protocol." Richard's gaze moved across the room, the flickering monitors, the sweating engineers, the executives glued to their phones, and then found his son. Damon stood near the central console, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, the bravado from that morning gone. "I told you to innovate, not dismantle," Richard said quietly. Damon tried to steady his tone. "The infrastructure was outdated. I was trying to integrate new governance layers." By removing the woman who built them, the question landed like a strike. No one dared move. Even the alarms seemed to fade into the background. Richard stepped closer to the main screen, its red light painting his reflection in crimson. "This system worked flawlessly for 2 decades, he said, each word clipped and deliberate. "Until today." He turned to the technicians. "Where is Nora Ellery?" Sophia Hahn hesitated, her hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. "She was terminated this morning. For the first time." Something broke in the old man's expression. His shoulders lowered, the fight draining from him. "Then you've severed the company's brain from its heart." He straightened again, voice rougher now. "Find her. Bring her back. Do it now." No one moved, but every eye turned toward the glass wall where, just hours earlier, Nora had walked out in silence. Richard looked at the chaos his empire had become, then whispered a word no one had ever heard from him before. "Please." Rain tapped against the cafe windows like static, blurring the neon reflections of the street outside. I sat near the corner, my laptop unopened, the warmth of untouched coffee fading beside it, across the room. People scrolled through their phones, unaware that the company dominating their headlines was quietly collapsing a few blocks away. I reached into my bag and pulled out a worn folder, the kind I hadn't touched in years. Inside, among brittle papers and faded printouts, was the letter Founders Agreement, 2002. The pages still smelled faintly of printer ink and sleepless nights. We'd been just a handful of dreamers back then, me, Richard Wexler, and 2 engineers who wanted to change the way networks thought for themselves. We didn't have lawyers or venture funds, only trust and exhaustion. The clause had been Richard's idea, scribbled in the margins. Intellectual property of all foundational architecture remains with its original creator until formal reassignment. We never filed the reassignment. The document had remained unsigned, forgotten once investors arrived and the company scaled. But legally and technically, the core system had always been mine. When Damon fired me that morning, he unknowingly dissolved the last administrative link between me and Helix. Termination cut my employee status, but it also voided the company's license to my code. They didn't own the system anymore. They were only borrowing it, and I'd just walked out with the key. I traced the faded signature line with my thumb. Somewhere inside that tower, they were tearing their hair out trying to find an administrator who no longer existed in their network. The irony made me smile. Though it wasn't joy I felt, it was closure. I hadn't planned revenge, only protection safeguards for something too important to be misused. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the folder. Message previews stacked up helix down. Trading halted. Clients fleeing. Outside. Thunder rolled across the city. I closed the folder gently and slipped it back into my bag. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet weight of ownership settle where fear used to live. At Helix Tower, the noise had changed. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was panic wrapped in silence. The kind that settles when people run out of ways to fix the unfixable. The walls glowed red under the emergency lights, and the air tasted of burnt circuits and fear. Damon stood before the main terminal, sleeves rolled, hair undone, his tie hanging useless around his neck. Sweat darkened his collar. His voice came low, almost pleading. Restart biometric access. Administrator override Wexler. Damon. Confirm. The machine scanned his fingerprint, the green beam crawling over his skin. Then the message appeared. Sharp and merciless across every screen. Authorization denied. Try again, he barked. It's reading wrong. He pressed his palm harder, then again, as if force could bend logic. The next line appeared, lockdown enhanced. Around him, engineers froze. Sophia Hahn rubbed her temples, whispering into her headset. Malik watched from his station, lips parted but voiceless. The system had sealed itself off entirely, no access, no fallback, no way to trick what was never designed to obey. Why won't it listen? Damon shouted, slamming his fist against the console. It's my company. No one answered. The words echoed through the room, hollow against the steady hum of the servers still running on a heartbeat older than his authority. Malik stood slowly. His hands shook as he whispered, "The backup's worthless without the original." The phrase spread, quiet at first, then louder as others repeated it. The backup is nothing without the original. It moved like a current through the crowd until it became a pulse. Someone began to clap. Just one pair of hands, soft but certain. Then another joined, then a dozen. They weren't clapping for Damon, standing frozen before a system that no longer recognized him. They were clapping for the woman who had walked out hours earlier, who had built the empire that now refused to kneel. The sound rose and filled the room, steady and undeniable, until even the alarms seemed to fade beneath it. By evening, the storm had quieted. The air over Lake Union smelled of metal and rain, the kind that softens the edges of everything it touches. I walked along the waterfront path, coat damp at the collar, shoes catching the faint rhythm of puddles beneath the streetlights. Across the lake, the skyline shimmered Helix Tower among it, dark and lifeless against the gold reflections of the city. The news tickers on the ferry dock screens rolled endlessly. Trading halted. Helix systems offline. CEO unresponsive. The words meant little now. My phone vibrated in my pocket every few seconds. Messages stacked like falling leaves, job offers, interview requests, reporters asking for statements. I let them ring and fade. I wasn't interested in being anyone's headline. I stopped at the railing overlooking the water. The reflection of the city trembled, bright then broken, just like the code that once lived in those servers. Somewhere in that glass tower, technicians were still searching for a fix, still trying to wake a system that had chosen silence over servitude. I thought of my father sitting by the window at home, waiting. The folder with his hospital bills lay on my kitchen counter, its red stamps no longer carrying the weight they once did. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past the unanswered calls, and tapped his number. He picked up on the second ring. His voice came soft, fragile, but steady. "Nora, it's over." "Dad," I said. "The bills are gone. Everything's okay now." There was a pause, then a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. "You sound lighter," he murmured. "Maybe I am." I watched the ripples shift across the lake, small waves catching the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt no need to rush, no code waiting to be written, no system demanding my attention. The tower behind me stayed dark. The city ahead shimmered with possibilities. I turned from the water and began walking toward home, each step steady, each breath my own.